Welcome back to The Ancient Gift. Your host is October Hallam. I'm Chris Matthew, and I'll be introducing her guests today. Her guests are Timothy Renner and Lon Strickler. Timothy is an author, illustrator, host of Strange Familiars podcast, paranormal investigator, and folk musician living in Pennsylvania. His illustrations have appeared in the pages of various books, magazines, and comics, as well as on many record and CD covers. Lon Strickler is a Fortean researcher, author, and publisher of the syndicated Phantoms and Monsters blog. His research and reports have been presented on various television segments, and he has also written several books. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining The Ancient Gift. I am October Hallam, and this evening I have Timothy Renner and Lon Strickler, and we're going to be unpacking the topic of cryptids. Now, to be quite honest with everybody, as I spoke with Lon earlier and Timothy, I don't have a lot of knowledge about cryptids, just what I've heard, of course, the typical Bigfoot and Yeti and things of that nature. But there are some fascinating stories throughout history and folklore throughout the world, and especially in our country. And I thought that they could enlighten us with some of their stories and their knowledge, on the subject. So who wants to lead, Lon or Timothy?
Go ahead, Tim.
Well, you're throwing it to me.
I say, tell us a little bit. Tell us a little bit. I have your bio, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh my goodness! So I've been into this weird stuff since I was a kid. I just loved it, and I didn't know what folklore was when I was a kid. It was just cool stuff, right? So I wanted to go where all the ghost stories were. If I heard about a ghost story, I wanted to go to that place. If I grew up on a farm in northern Maryland, and if somebody said, "Oh, this house is haunted," or "There's supposed to be a ghost on this road," I always wanted to go to that place, and really, really loved it. And later on, I learned that this stuff is called folklore. I was like, "Oh, this is what I've been loving since I was a kid." But as far as cryptids, I grew up in what I call like the golden age of Bigfoot, which is, I was born in 1970. The famous Patterson-Gimlin film, if you're familiar with that, was filmed in 67, I believe. So right before I was born, but really people didn't get to see it until around the time I was born. Then In Search Of was on TV, and Legend of Boggy Creek was in the theaters. And
wasn't Leonard Nimoy the narrator for In Search Of?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic show. It's absolutely fantastic. So it was a great time to grow up, to be into this stuff. So Bigfoot kind of had this pop culture moment going on then, as it does now, kind of a resurgence. But I really loved it from the start. And, as I got a little older, I began to get more seriously interested in it, and started writing books. And then I started a podcast where I talked to witnesses every week. And honestly, Lon was a big influence and a mentor for me when I got started. So I always love talking with Lon, because I consider him definitely someone who gave me help along the way to get where I am.
And what's your latest book?
My latest book is called The Witch Cloud, and it has to do with haunted bridges in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, I really want to go there. As a historian and a medium, Gettysburg holds a double-edged, interest for me, as far as like the Civil War battle, obviously, but also as, a medium going to the haunted places and the battlefields. I heard that you can, at some points during the year and some dates, you can see the spirits of the Civil War soldiers on the battlefield, and actually hear sometimes like the gunshots, and there's mists and things like that pop up. Have you guys heard about that?
I've seen photos that people have taken.
Wow.
That, I can only say what they claimed to show. And they said there were no reenactors there. That are stunning photographs of entire. I'm not a military guy. I'm going to say unit. I don't know. I don't know the size. There's a bunch of Confederate soldiers. It looked like. There's some fantastic photos that pop up. There's I think a Gettysburg paranormal group on Facebook. I think that's where I saw them. But there's some fantastic photos. But yeah, Gettysburg is an amazing place. Come during the day for history and stay at night for the ghosts. So that's what I tell people.
Interesting. I was just going to ask you two real quick. One, I'm going to get to, I promise. But as far as I know that they do reenactments. Do you know that when they do reenactments, does that incite any kind of activity to, start, manifest?
I don't have a strong answer for that. Anecdotally, I think people have said it can, but I've never talked to anyone specifically that said, I was a reenactor and blank, blank, and blank happened at Gettysburg. I have talked to reenactors on other Civil War battlefields. I think Antietam, I had a guest on my podcast who had a pretty strange encounter in Antietam as a reenactor. So
cool. And so Lon, tell us a little bit about yourself, please, and how you got into the world of cryptids.
Well, I was born and raised just east of Gettysburg, and I actually moved down to Maryland for about 40 years. And I know the areas Tim used to hang around at and lived at down there. So, we kind of followed same paths. He moved up to Pennsylvania. Now I'm living back up here. My first encounter or first experience in the paranormal was at Gettysburg. Actually, I used to spend a lot of time on the battlefield when I was a kid. I used to get on my bike and ride up 116 over to the battlefield. I spent a lot of Saturdays and summer afternoons there. And one particular day, I was about 9 years old, and I was in the area that they call the Valley of Death, which is between Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the wheat field. And all of a sudden, it's like a TV screen opened up in front of me, and I was observing the battle. And I saw soldiers, heard gunfire, smelled gun smoke, the whole 9 yards. My senses were all heightened. It lasted about 30 seconds and disappeared. Now, I'd always sensed that I had something about me that was different. And that's really the first time that anything had manifested to me. But as time went on, and as I spent more time there and got older and got into high school and back in the 70s, I was doing paranormal investigations back then when nobody even heard of that or looked at you weird when you said that.
When it wasn't cool.
Yeah. And, I started to realize I was an intuitive. And, that's kind of where it started off at. Then after I left here, after I left high school and attempted to go to college and came back and living in Maryland, I had an encounter in 1981 with a Bigfoot down in Maryland, down in Sykesville, Maryland. And that's kind of where my interest in cryptids started. I really got into it. I started looking into the phenomena pretty heavy, especially around the area. That's where it kind of took off at. And as time has gone by, I started the Phantoms of Monsters blog in 2005. And have been doing it since. And, I've written 9 books now. And
what's your latest book?
The Meme Humanoids, Modern Myths or Real Monsters. And it has to do with the pale humanoid sightings that have been generating more and more in the past decade or so. I believe that there's a possibility that these may be mind-manifested beings or thought formers, if you may. And
okay, so hold on, time out. For us novices, what does that specifically mean?
Well, thought form?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mind-generated entity. Basically, just like what I call these humanoids memes. It's a thought or a graph or something that's talked about a lot, and to the point where the human mind may actually generate these things. Now, thought forms or tulpas also are proven to be real. There have been experiments, paranormal experiments, parapsychologists who have proved that mind manifestation does actually happen. And I think there's a possibility that in the case of these humanoids, this very well may be going on as well.
So I want to ask both of you a question real quick. You guys can choose between who answers what first, but Now, the more I get into this rabbit hole of spirituality, consciousness, unexplained things from ufology to spirits to cryptids, there seems to be an underlying trend where there's a correlation of activity. So let's say somebody sees a Bigfoot, okay, out in the forest or wherever they are. Typically, they've either seen a UFO before that or like right after that, or they'll see like strange lights in the forest, or they might even see a spirit, or there might be spiritual activity at their home and there never was before. Do you guys find that in your research that that's a typical manifestation along with the these things happening where one kind of either invites or triggers the other?
Absolutely. To the point where I have trouble separating them myself anymore. They seem to be all manifestations of the same, well, a similar, if not the same phenomenon. Look at unusual lights, mystery lights. If a good friend of mine, Soraya Askath, who does the Where Did the Road Go podcast, has a saying that I love to borrow. And Soraya said, if somebody sees funny lights in a house, it's a ghost. Somebody sees funny lights in the woods, it's Bigfoot. Somebody sees funny lights in the sky, it's a UFO, but they're all mystery lights. Poltergeist activity follows all of these phenomena all the way around. A lot of what they call Class B Bigfoot activity, where people are in the woods and they smell a bad smell, and perhaps they get something thrown at them. They might hear banging or knocking, unknown voices, or
like a howl. Language. Doesn't it have like a howl? Like I've heard recordings of it.
Howls, all that, but they don't actually see a creature. They have all this happen. Even sometimes they get paced in the woods, and this has happened to me. And it sounds like something's right beside you, and you can't see it. But people say, "Oh no, it paced me out of the woods." All of this is poltergeist activity. If that happened in your house, you would call it poltergeist activity. But because it's in the woods, people are saying, "Oh, it was Bigfoot. It was Bigfoot that did this." I mean, maybe it was, but it certainly sounds like poltergeist activity. All this stuff is found along with poltergeist. So I look at the paranormal holistically at this point. I try not to separate it. Yes, Bigfoot sightings, especially in Pennsylvania, Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings seem to go hand in hand. Other places as well, but Pennsylvania is where we live. So, we have a pretty good record going back to the early 70s and Lon's friend and my friend, why am I blanking on his name?
Stan
Gordon. Thank you, Lon. Thank you. Oh, tongue tied. Stan Gordon's work back to the early 70s has shown this connection. And I don't think Lon shied away from this pretty much ever. In fact, he was one of the early people I reached out to when I started going, "Hey, this weird stuff's happening all across." And Lon wasn't too surprised. He said, "Yeah, it does." But it absolutely happens. If Lon wants to expand on that.
Yeah, this is just something that investigators, even myself and Tim and others, have experienced as well. It's and more so recently, we get a lot more sightings that are reported to an investigator in Pennsylvania, where they'll go out even a couple of days later and start seeing phenomena, seeing orbs and such, and hearing things. And it just seems to be that these separate phenomena or aspects of the paranormal seem to be connected somehow. Stan was, he had reported back in the 70s during the 73 flap here in Pennsylvania of the UFO Bigfoot connection, where a UFO had been seen in one particular case out off the Chestnut Ridge, where Bigfoot creatures showed up after the sightings of the UFOs. And there have been other investigators over the years who have stated that there's a lot of similar type of activity that goes on. In fact, the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society is actually looking into a sighting near the ridge now that they can't say it's really Bigfoot, but there's a lot of audio phenomena, a lot of orbs and such, a lot of weird things going on in this one particular area. So, and it's something that we've experienced here in Pennsylvania a lot throughout the state. I mean, I just posted a story today of somebody who had very similar type of activity. So, yeah, I mean, I can't say it happens everywhere. It does happen a lot of other places, but it's pretty prevalent around here.
So I have a few. When I'm looking down, I'm writing questions. By the way, you're triggering me for the questions. So here, so I believe this as well. I mean, I've had some similar experiences where I have had some spiritual activity, and then I've seen a few. There's a couple UFOs in my life that I've seen, and when I was really younger, before I really realized what my gifts were, intuitively, I kind of played around with the occult a little bit in high school. Like the I could astral project, and it seemed to be when I started to really open my mind up to this, then that activity seemed to find me, right? So do you feel like, I mean, I know there's a lot of skeptics out there that say, I was a skeptic and then I saw a ghost, or then I saw a Bigfoot, and I'm not a skeptic anymore. But even if you're a skeptic, or if your mind is open to it, now you had mentioned, Lon, self-manifestation of, and thought, like if you think about these things and like they appear, do you think that's, I mean, obviously we are known to have telepathic abilities. We're just not using them, right, with our pineal gland. But do you think that these beings somehow can reach us, or, trigger our abilities this way to be open to seeing them, hearing them, feeling them, and then therefore all the other paranormal activity kind of falls in behind that? Where did Timothy go? Timothy.
This is, just like, Tim had mentioned poltergeist activity. Basically, poltergeist activity is mind manifested. It's, you go into a house where there's suspected activity going on. It doesn't take long before you start realizing that one of the individuals is unconsciously mind manifesting some type of entity.
There you are.
Yeah, sorry, I lost connection here.
That's okay.
And when that does happen, that's when you got, to distinguish what is actually going on. Tim mentioned poltergeist activity in the woods, in the outdoors. I think it's very possible that either these creatures are either cloaked or just not being seen, or even the witness itself may actually be mind manifesting some type of activity as well. The human mind's a funny thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of things that just seem to crop up when you're working into an investigation, and it happens more and more. It's interesting when you do talk to somebody, say you have a cryptid sighting, and you go and talk to them, and you contact them, and you go to the location, or you're talking to him. Me being an intuitive, there's a lot of times when I sense something else is going on, and maybe something spiritual is involved or something other than that. And you ask them about that, and they kind of look at you like you're crazy. You say, well, how'd you know that? I didn't think that was important. Well, yeah, that is important, because a lot of times there's a basis for a lot of this activity.
And so, and I just want to real quick, sorry to cut you off here, but poltergeist. So a lot of the audience may think of the movie Poltergeist, where, it was this development was built on a graveyard, and these are no, poltergeist is actually a self-manifestation of kinetic energy, really, right? That seems to, yes, that seems to manifest and activity. But I find it interesting that every poltergeist story I've ever heard has been mostly negative. Do you find that?
It can generate into something very negative.
That's why a lot of teenagers are.
Yeah, the basis for the mind manifestation can go a lot of levels. It's either some type of dysfunction in the family group, or the child is going through puberty and the hormones are raging, or something other than that. It could be on a lot of different things that could trigger it. And when that's the case, it's not a matter of some investigator, intuitive, or psychic going in there and getting rid of it. You have to find the problem. You have to work with the individual who's doing this unconsciously, and try to calm down the situation. And eventually it'll go away. It takes time sometimes, though. It takes a lot of time. I've worked on poltergeist cases that have lasted for multiple years.
Wow.
Yeah.
do you think that these beings, I'm going to go to Timothy. Do you think that these beings, personally for me, I used to think like UFOs were in the sky and ghosts were in the afterlife and cryptids were, I don't know, on Earth, and we just don't really know a lot about them because they're able to like shield or hide themselves wherever their natural environment habitat is. But now that I'm older and a little hopefully wiser, and I've done a lot more research, of course, I have a history degree. I think now more, and science is kind of going along this line too, that way there are multiple dimensions. So perhaps these are more of like an interdimensional event that cross over or pass through like I want to say like a time loop, right? Where that's why sometimes you'll see a Bigfoot, you'll get an accounting like this ginormous being was right there. And then all of a sudden I looked over and it was gone, but I could see the footprints. It was like almost like it just evaporated or went to thin air. So what do you think about all this phenomena being like interdimensionally related? And then we just see like little glimpses of what's, kind of looping together.
It's possible. I'm very cautious about saying it is this or it is that, because the truth is no one really knows. Right. And anybody who tells you this is what Bigfoot is, they need to provide receipts, because so far we don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. The interdimensional hypothesis, let's call it, is super interesting. And it's one that I will play with, kind of mentally play with the idea, and certainly like it as a potential explanation. But until we know more about what that could mean, what interdimensional really means, and what abilities, something that could skip dimensions like that, whether by choice or by accident, what that takes and what abilities they have, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of, it's kind of science fiction to kind of play with those ideas. That said, I'm open to, like I said, considering this as an option, but I just kind of hold out and go, well, let's see, let's work with what we do know here, and then we can posit these different theories. Is absolutely fine. But until we know for sure that one way or another, then it's just kind of science fiction, which isn't bad. It isn't bad. That's how we get to answers, by speculation.
Well, look at science fiction. Look at Star Trek, where they have the little communicators now, and we have cell phones so we can see each other, or sure. Or the fact we've been in outer space, with launches and things. I'm not going to say we've been to the moon because we're not going to go there, but that we do have a lot of technology that was considered science fiction at one point, and now it's proven to come to pass. So
yeah, I'm not saying the speculation isn't valuable to do. It is, but it's just, for me personally, I just kind of, I shy away from saying it's this or it's that, so if interdimensional, sure, maybe, I'm willing to entertain the idea, but I'm not going to say, yeah, that's what I think.
Right. Well, this is all speculation. I know, let's face it, if you, me, or Lon discovered a Bigfoot and we were able to bring like authentic proof, right, we'd be billionaires. So there's no proof yet, but hopefully one day. Lon,
there's some good evidence. There's some really good evidence. The footprints they have are fantastic evidence. They show things like dermal ridges and mid-tarsal breaks, and things that people who are experts in primate anatomy look at and say, you'd have to be an expert to fake this. So it really, really argues against them being fake. But they're just footprints. That's all we have. And we had ghost footprints back in the 50s. They would put, powder down and watch footprints go for ghosts. So the fact that we have footprints doesn't, necessarily mean that there's a flesh and blood creature out there. It just means that at times, whatever this is, has a physical presence and leaves footprints.
Lon, as a historian, I know that I was super fascinated with this stuff too as a kid. And I noticed that if you go into the Tibetan area, I believe there's the Yeti, and then we have Bigfoot and the Native American cultures all through the United States. Most of them have like a shapeshifter or a skinwalker or a Bigfoot story, dogman, something like that. So I find it interesting that, and I'm not sure about other parts of the world because I haven't really done a lot of reading, but I believe Russia also has like a Bigfoot. But or Yeti, right? Don't you feel like there's some truth in these stories only because they're told by so many people across the world, right, that haven't spoke to each other about this phenomena, yet their stories are scarily similar in either the accounts or the fact that these creatures do exist.
Oh yeah, I believe there's definitely connection. There's a lot of different threads this go to, but the Native Americans and other indigenous people thought these beings, for the most part, were spirit animals or spirits, or uh, and
they might be right.
And they may very well be. I mean,
Yeah.
these things could be interdimensional. I believe that most cryptids are possibly ultra terrestrial of some type of that they have the ability to move between our Earth plane and a dimension where they reside. I think there are indigenous Bigfoot. I think there are flesh and blood that live on this Earth plane in specific areas. But I also believe that there are very similar type beings that come through by whatever means, dimensional wise, into this Earth plane back and forth, and have the ability to either cloak or transform or shapeshift or however you want to call it. But the evidence of no bodies and a lot of physical evidence of actual existence, it's pretty hard to dispute. I mean, there's something there that we really don't know. We don't know the answers to. And it also applies to other cryptids as well. We've been working on this the Chicago Mothman case for years now. And we believe at this point, this is probably an ultra-terrestrial being of some type that has the ability to move in and out of dimensions. And just for the fact that this thing has a fleeting sighting, it's very, nobody sees during the day. For the most part, it seems to pick its time, or the people to see it. There are some type of paranormal or supernatural aspects to these beings, as well as I believe with Bigfoot, upright canines, dogman, any other type of cryptid being. I think there's aspects to it we don't understand. Hopefully we'll be able to ascertain what it is that does cause their existence. But the one thing about cryptozoology, I don't think it's ever going to become moot, even to the point if we start finding bodies, something else is going to crop up.
Well, look at all the pictures that you like that thing that washed up. I don't even know what to call it. It was like no hair, kind of had a pig snout and hooves and like sharp teeth. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, you're talking about the Montauk monster or whatever that was.
Yes. I don't know if it's a fake thing, but
I don't know what that was.
Right, but isn't that near the facility on Plum Island in New York where they did a lot of like testing and like hybridization between species and stuff?
There's a big story about that. I mean, I don't know what exact type of experiments they did there. There have been a few things found around that area, around Long Island, over the years. Been a lot of stories. You don't know how true they are. But I mean, that thing was kind of weird looking. But be honest with you, it did kind of look like a
rubber,
just like some type of raccoon type mix or something to that effect. I don't know what it was. I mean, it's an interesting picture. You can't really tell if it was doctored either. It could very well be doctored photographs. So.
And I want to get to that point. Two quick questions before I ask you the third. So I always thought that there was possibly a connection to mythos of giants as the children of the Nephilim, from the Bible, right? And then perhaps like Bigfoot is the remnants of these beings who were kind of demigods, right? They were mixed with divinity and then, hominid. And maybe somehow they're able to survive by shielding themselves or being able to hide from us, right? But you had mentioned primates, Timothy. Do you think that Bigfoot, if it does exist, is a primate or a hominid? Because the film in '67 that I saw, that had a bipedal gait where it just walked naturally across the woods, and it had like the moving arms, or she had the moving arms. That did not move like a primate that I have ever seen.
Well, now you're getting into get a little deeper into the biology than I remember. Are hominids are subset of primates? Are they both subsets of the same order?
Good question.
I forget. But hominid would be my guess. That we're all, it would be if it's a natural creature, it would have to be a great ape. wherein we have more problems regarding the other things that manifest like eye shine. There's no high order monkeys that have a tapetum lucidum, which is the coating over the eyes that reflects light. So it would be the only high order primate, if it was a natural animal, that has this biological feature. The diet is a huge concern, because if you look at the mountain gorilla, and if you put a brain our size in a mountain gorilla's body, and you know, if Bigfoot are real, they would have to be incredibly smart. They would have to have a brain near to ours, or perhaps even bigger, because they're incredibly smart, according to all accounts. If you put a brain our size into a mountain gorilla's body, they literally wouldn't have enough time in the day to gather enough food, because they're foraging for food. And you need to power that big brain. You need to power the big body. You need to power the big brain. And they don't cook their food. Now, what we do as humans is we cook our food, and that allows us to get the most calories out of the calories that we can. We get the most bang out of the calories by cooking the food. Since the woods are not alive with campfires, we can assume that Sasquatch isn't cooking their food. So they're eating, you know, raw food, and their impact on the environment, if they have their breeding population, would be incredible. They'd have to be constantly eating. They'd have to be, you know, it's difficult to imagine a natural, you know, creature of that size that's not leaving a noticeable impact on the environment, if there's a breeding population of them. Now, again, this is all like if it's a natural creature. I come down on the side of it's probably something else, probably something paranormal, or something with gifted with so many evolutionary advantages that it might as well be paranormal.
Mm-hmm. Well, Homo sapiens are, you know, we have been evolving for hundreds of thousands and millions of years to, you know, we used to eat a lot of, as nomadic peoples, we used to eat a lot of grasses and things like that were not domesticated, including meat and game and things. And I'm not saying we eat it raw, but, you know, we are, you know, losing our incisors. We had rougher, eye teeth here to bite through the grass and stuff, you know, 100,000, 200,000 years ago. So, I mean, anything's possible, but I just thought because of the gait of the walk on any of the videos that I've ever seen, seems to me to have more humanistic qualities, or Homo sapien qualities, than would a primate.
Best we have is witness accounts. And with these witness accounts, I've collected them from old newspaper articles that go back to the 1700s. You can, beyond that, it's more folklore than you know, witness accounts, which there's still value in folklore. I don't write off folklore. Folklore is our ancestors talking about this stuff, and it's kind of changed over the years, and you know, it's been whispered down the lane a bit, but there's nuggets of truth in there in folklore. So folklore and fiction, in my opinion, are not necessarily the same thing. But these accounts, like I said, that go back at least to the 1700s, that describe these things, they describe, many of them, not all of them, but many of them describe a very strange locomotion where they will go from 2-leg, upright, walking like a human, to 4-leg, will drop down on all fours and run on all fours. And again, these accounts are in the old newspaper articles in the 1800s, and they're in modern accounts today. So, you know, yeah, the Patty film, it's, you know, it's got an interesting gait. It's got a gait unlike any human walks in that film. You know, it's very, very strange gait for those who pay attention to that kind of thing. It is an upright gait. It's like our gait, but it's not quite the same.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, super interesting. You know, there are things about these creatures that point to it, you know, hey, this looks like, you know, things we do. This looks like other primates. This looks like other hominids, you know, but like I said, there's a lot of questions that surround it for me that say, okay, yeah, but it seems like there's something else going on here too.
Lon, what do you think about that? Hominid or primate?
Well, in cryptozoology, or the research investigations we do, we normally refer to them as hominids, and I guess that's the only way to delineate it from an actual primate, because, you know, they could be very related to primates just like humans are, but they do have a lot of aspects to them, a lot of characteristics that are very human as well. So I think hominids is a pretty good definition for them.
I always thought when I was a kid, I thought that perhaps, because for a long, long time when Darwin came out with the theory of evolution and survival of the fittest, I thought that, hominids and primates, like everyone else did, came from the same, place, but we just didn't know when it branched out. And I thought perhaps maybe Bigfoot at that time when I was thinking this, perhaps came from the same lot, right? But because of where their habitat is and their abilities, maybe evolved in a different way than primates and humans, because we don't really know. And we used to think it was a trunk of a tree that branched out and that was it. Now we know it's, the story of evolution. You've got the Denisovans, the Neanderthals, the little people in Indonesia. You got all kinds of hominids out there that, are extinct, but prove that, they existed at the same time on this planet and even interbred with each other. So I always wonder if perhaps that, somehow their story got lost in our human history, like a lot of our human history got lost.
I used to be a very strict evolutionist years and years ago. But, as I've gotten involved with the paranormal and looked into a lot of different things, had experiences, talked to people and such, I believe there's a very, very good possibility that there was some type of intervention somehow. Now, I'm not saying it's on a religious sense or something like that. I think there's some type of natural intervention that occurred somehow.
You mean like a separation of Pangea and the continental
drift? Or maybe some type of non-terrestrial intervention. And when I say non-terrestrial, I say beings not of this planet.
You mean on the Anunnaki?
No, not necessarily. Something that's not human.
Mm-hmm.
The whole panacea for history and the paranormal with me is that I do believe that humans are a universal species for the most part, and that the so-called aliens or extraterrestrials that people see now are most likely evolved humans that have come back somehow.
That's
for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to cryptids and humans, also humans, that there has been some type of intervention at some point. Something else got involved that either helped direct certain things, that helped modify DNA or whatever you want to think it is. I mean, we have no real proof of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very interesting, look at our technology over the past 100 years and how it's changed and how it's increased and kind of doubles every couple of years as far as, there's something else involved here.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say that these beings or entities that may have been involved with that may have also been involved with our human or cryptid or life on Earth, if there was some type of intervention at some point.
So I'm gonna go way out of like the realm of like probably, well, maybe you've heard this before, but I want to see, hopefully it's a little bit of original. I wonder sometimes when I look back at history and I read about Greek mythos and Egyptian mythos, there are a lot of cryptid creatures and gods, demigods that are cryptids. Both,
and I think there was a reason for that. And I'm not going to get into my abduction and what I was shown and all that, because there have been things that have happened to me in the past. But
wait, back up. You can't just spit that out and then not say anything about it. That was
back in 2015. I mean, it's a whole long story, but my wife was ill, and she got cancer, and that whole year. And I think Tim has heard this, but that whole year I was seeing references to owls.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing owls, hearing about owls on TV, hearing owls outside, this and that. And during that period of time, I had 2 encounters at home with three very tall, gray-like beings.
Mm-hmm.
And both instances, I was out because my wife was in the bedroom because of her illness, and I was sleeping out in the living room. And these things would just suddenly show up beside me on my recliner.
Wow.
On 2 occasions. And I know I saw them. I mean, some people, you were dreaming, but no. So not long after my wife passed away in the end of 2015.
I'm sorry, by the way.
Actually, the night she passed, there was an owl outside our apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And when the hospital called me and told me she had passed, then the owl had left. But my son and I were watching his owl for a couple of hours, but then after she passed, it left. And but anyway, I just assumed there was something going on there. I was being told or warned or whatever. But anyway, a couple of weeks after that, there was an abduction scenario where I was involved with, and I was taken to a location where this and I don't know if it was in a craft or someplace else, but these three beings were there again. And they were communicating with me. People say mind speak. Maybe it's mind speak. I don't know what it is, but I understood what they're telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And they showed me a screen. And I was looking at the screen, but it was almost like I was there. And they showed me a massive circular craft. I mean, the size of a huge city, that landed in the area which is now the delta of the Nile. So it was pretty far out into the nowadays it would be pretty far out into the Mediterranean.
So would that be like a Mesopotamia area back 6,500 years ago?
Well, there's some relation to that. So the dates I got from them was between 13th and 12th millennia BCE. That's what they told me.
Okay.
And it seemed that the beings on this craft were human-like, but of course they weren't human. They were some other, well, then again, maybe they could have been humans coming back. But anyway, this is what they showed me. The one question I asked them right away was, is this Atlantis? And they never did.
I was going to ask you about Atlantis.
They never did answer that. And they never have since, because I had one more encounter with them later. But anyway, what was told to me, that this craft was the beginning of an empire, which was the nexus of several the Eastern Mediterranean civilizations, say the Fertile Crescent, the Mesopotamians, and the Greeks, and of course the Egyptians. And they concentrated very heavily on the Egyptians. And then they showed me a time around the 18th dynasty with Amenhotep III was ruling, and some type of event occurred. It was a very earth-shattering event of something. I think they saw a huge craft in the sky, and I believe, because if you know the history of Amenhotep III, he had issues with the priest, and the priests were having, they were kind of rebelling.
He was the elongated.
No, that was his son. That's Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten.
Oh, Akhenaten. That's right. Okay.
And I believe that Akhenaten had seen this the way his father was dealing with the priest and such. And I believe that this was the nexus for the monotheistic deism theories or religion of Akhenaten, which of course was the Amarna age for the 17 years, or actually it was the 14 years at Amarna, and the Aten sun god. Of course, him being what they called the heretic king and such. They also showed me something else, which, I mentioned slightly in one of my books, but, and actually there have been theories about it by others. And in fact, Sigmund Freud had the same theory, that Moses was actually the forgotten son of Amenhotep III. which was Prince Tutmos. And you don't hear anything about Prince Tutmos much because it's just figured in history that he died. But from what I was showed, he may have been the actual Moses. Now, I don't know if that is true. I don't know. There's so many different theories about about the Exodus and, the slaves and the Hebrews leaving Egypt to go into the desert and such, into Canaan. But that was a profound experience that I had, and the fact that they showed me these different things, and and how they went into such detail. Now, why they showed that to me, I don't know, but I believe that there is something to that. And personally, I think they're not done telling the story to me. I don't know if they're going to. Now, I did have an encounter later, but nothing really resulted from it. It was very quick, and I don't really remember much about it. Something may have happened. I've had people tell me, "Well, you got to get a regression." This, and I don't know if I want to do that. But yeah, I mean, it's been a strange trip the last 7 years or so.
I find it interesting, though, when you were talking about what they showed you, what they were able to show you, and they gave you like that timeline. When you're talking the 12th or 13th century BCE, you're talking the Great Deluge, which there is physical evidence of this throughout the world. And also it is credited for what I believe is the last remnants of Atlantis, the survivors of Atlantis perishing. I mean, I think we have, little tiny things here and there that give us hints of Atlanteans, the Atlantis civilization, the technology. And I think people get caught up on, advanced technology, but technology, we're not talking about iPhones and social media. We're talking about ley lines in the earth using, a natural grid system to expand on energy, to conduct energy, to distribute energy. We're talking about telekinesis. We're talking about advanced technology that is in our DNA, but we just don't know how to use it, right? And there have been tests in major universities around the world that have tested some of these abilities in people, a lot of children especially, that do have proof of telekinesis and telepathic, tendencies. I mean, I'm sure, like back in the day when we all had landlines when we were kids, right? And the phone rang and you knew who it was before you answered the phone, before caller ID or any of that stuff. That's telepathic abilities, but we don't give that credit because we're told that it doesn't exist. So we just
I think we have a lot of that because it's something we really lost at some point.
Right.
I think everybody's got an intuitive ability, even a psychic ability that can be developed. I mean, I've learned how to remote view. I was trained as a remote viewer, and I think anybody can learn to be a remote viewer. It doesn't really have anything to do with being intuitive or psychic. It does help sometimes, but I think any human being has the ability to do some things beyond what what the dogma is as far as being a human nowadays. It's different. I don't like going into religious terms or religious aspects of all this. One thing I've always found is very interesting as far as what's going on with these civilizations. And I think you probably do know this, that the Giza Plateau is actually the exact center of the Asian, African, European landmass.
Mm-hmm. And if you extrapolate the lines from the Giza pyramid and the plateau, and you go around, you actually run right through Stonehenge. You run right through all these major monoliths and ancient, buildings and structures. And I don't think that's an accident. I don't think it's an accident. I think that's somehow these ancient people had a lot more knowledge than we do. We rely now on GPS, but I think they were more in tune, like with the earth and ley lines and energy and flow than we are. And now we rely more on technology, right? So we, I think, have replaced our natural abilities somewhat with technology. I wanted to real quick tell you, I actually have remote viewed before but I didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to find a person, and I'm trying to find a dog, and I was successful in both cases. My sister used to call me up and say, I lost my keys. Where are they? And I'd close my eyes and I'd be like, there, blah, blah. And if, sure enough, they would be there. Now, I didn't know that was remote viewing, but I know this is going to sound weird, but you kind of become the keys, or you become the eyes on the keys, and then you can like see like where they are, and you can feel darkness, or you can no light, or cool if cold, or so I've been able to locate objects and things like that, and I'm not sure how I have that ability, and I didn't know it was remote viewing for the longest time. I just was able to do it. So like you said,
remote viewing, and then there's people are highly intuitive, can go into it like a phase of remote viewing where they can actually pick up on these type of things. I think everybody is able to do that to a degree. Now, I know we're getting away from cryptids.
No, that's okay. That's okay. The ancient gift is named because of my exploration of knowledge, and we're going to get back to circle back here in a minute, because I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm going to go with Timothy real quick. Okay. So I've always been fascinated with mermaids, centaurs, like fairies, like all these things. Do you think there's truth in these folklore, or do you think that these are just—
You're speaking to the right guy with Tim.
The fictional imagination of, amazing people back in the day that wrote about these, creatures?
No, I mean, people are still seeing this stuff today.
Right.
It's like I said before, I think it was our ancestors were talking about these things. They were telling us how to deal with them. The rules that they laid down, quote unquote rules, in my experience, still apply today. For instance, there's a lot of cautionary tales as regards to entering gifting situations with these entities, whether you're leaving food out and taking things in return, and it can get to a very hairy situation, no pun intended. And our ancestors wrote about that in folklore. They said, do this, don't do that. And in my experience, it very much applies. So I think it's probably hard-won wisdom, over hundreds of years before somebody finally wrote it down. And again, there's a bit of whispering down the lane. So, it might have, a 10-foot hairy man that somebody saw in the woods might have turned into a 25-foot giant that somebody saw roaming the hillside or something. But a lot of this wisdom still applies, and a lot of these types of creatures. I mean, today people will report seeing goat man. What a weird thing that is. Well, Pan and other the satyrs back in the day. Fairies took all kinds of forms, big and small. When people say fairies, I think because of the modern representation, Tinkerbell and so forth, people think they're always tiny, but no, fairies could be giant or small. They could seem like they could take all different shapes and sizes, good, bad, and everything in between. So I don't think that we ever stopped seeing these things. I think probably culturally things change a little bit. I think if we take Bigfoot, we talked before about how all these different Bigfoot type creatures seen all over the world. To my knowledge, every civilization had a wild man. We just call them generally wild men, and give them different names, but generally every civilization had a wild man that lived in the woods or in the mountains, sometimes even in the desert beside them. This wild man archetype, let's call it, seems to change a little bit. The medieval wild man was very much a wizard. He was this wise guy in the forest. They also would refer to him as a wizard. When you get up to Victorian times, pre-Darwin, you often get these wild man reports where they'll say this is a hairy guy in the forest, this big hairy guy, but he was wearing scraps of clothes, like torn up clothes, sometimes carrying a beat up musket that won't fire, like a rusty old musket or something, or an axe. They're sometimes seen, building fires, which we don't get with our wild men today. As you move up to Darwin and post-Darwin, when the West becomes aware, we did not discover the mountain gorilla. The African people knew it was there already, but the West became aware of the mountain gorilla in the late 1800s. Then people start calling them gorillas, and then they had the aspect of them tends to change. Now, these aren't hard and fast rules. It doesn't happen overnight, but it changes a little bit. And then you get this hairy gorilla reports in the newspapers that people are seeing in places where there are not gorillas. And they'll say, oh, it must have escaped from a circus. Well, we know exactly how many gorillas were in the United States at any one time, and they're nowhere near enough to account for all these gorilla sightings. And they just didn't let them escape. I mean, so that when they did escape, they tracked them down because they were very, very expensive. So that, people, oh, they were just escaped. No, they were not. So people were seeing what they were calling gorillas. When you get up to the 1930s or so, then the monster movies come out. Then the reports in the paper change and people are seeing big, hairy monsters. Because culturally, we have something else to reference now. We've got the monster movies. This continues until the 50s or the 60s, where the Bigfoot phenomena happens. And then we say, oh, we have Bigfoot. But the trend of the wild man is to get wilder over time. So remember, we went from this wizard in medieval times to this kind of crazy mountain man, half human, hairy thing, carrying tools and wearing clothes in the 1800s to our Bigfoot is a very, very wild man. And I think, again, this is just my theory, as we get further away from nature, our wild man necessarily, because it's that's between us and nature, our wild man gets wilder. So we get, we don't ever have to be in darkness now. We have electronic lights. We don't ever have to be cold. We don't have to live within the seasons. We have temperature controlled houses. Nature really doesn't affect us the way it did in the past. And we live further and further away from nature. The further we get away from nature, the wilder our wild man gets. The opposite happens with UFOs. UFOs in the 1800s were airships. They were balloons, Zeppelins, before we had Zeppelins. And then they turned into kind of Art Nouveau, saucers on up into, the black triangles in the 70s, which were before we had stealth ships, just before. They're always a little bit ahead of us. And now they're like, people are reporting like, balls of plasma and, technology. So the UFO technology is always ahead of us. It's always beyond us. As the UFO gets more technical, the wild man gets wilder. Again, just a theory, but it seems to certainly apply.
So I kind of had I don't know if anybody else has ever pitched this theory to you, but I do believe that giants existed. Okay, so I'm going to go in a little bit of different direction. And I think, and for whatever reason, academia and powers that be don't want us to really know about giants. That's why they confiscate all the bones and try to blot out all the history of, giant beings, hominids, right? But there's that condition of, I'm going to probably butcher this, but hypertrichosis, which is hair all over your body, whereas I wonder sometimes if perhaps there was stay with me, a man, like a giant hominid, okay, like they're giants, 8, 9, 10 feet tall, and they had this condition, which would make sense, and they somehow managed to survive without being detected. Let's say when people say that's impossible with our technology now, but if you've ever been to the Pacific Northwest, specifically like Washington and Oregon, there are millions of square miles there of unexplored or barely explored or used forest and woodland. So I'm wondering sometimes maybe we just haven't discovered this species, as far as it could be like a hominid with this kind of like hairy condition. Is that too far out there, or?
I mean, to assign hypertrichosis to a some kind of tall humanoid, I don't know. It's too far out there. Could there be a species of some sort that we haven't discovered in the Pacific Northwest? I allow a small possibility for that personally. Now, again, this is just me personally. It could, but in Pennsylvania, where I get tons of Bigfoot sightings, Lon gets tons of Bigfoot sightings every year. There can't be a breeding population here. We would know. There's in York County where I live, there's no wilderness, and I get reports all through the year, all times a year, of these things. So if there was a breeding population here, we'd know it. We would 100% know it. They would leave a mark on the land. So at least where we are, I don't really leave any chance of there being, a natural breeding population of these things. In the Pacific Northwest, maybe. I haven't explored every square mile, I'm not, but the longer we go on without finding a body, having anything in the historical records, the fossil record that really corresponds to this thing, the more doubtful I am, but I'll allow a possibility, like maybe the giant skeletons you're speaking of are very interesting, but I think they're a different thing from Bigfoot. All reports of them seem to be human skeletons. They're very human, just big, just
right.
But if like the early reports of the Susquehannock Indians,
absolutely, I'm just going to say,
yeah, the male Susquehannock Indians were reported, to be between 6 and 7 foot tall. All the males at the time. Those are big. Those are big people. So when they're finding 8 and 9 foot skeletons, it's not that much taller than what the Susquehannocks were reported to being. So there could have just been, a tribe of humans here that were just really tall. As the Susquehannocks were reported to be. Which doesn't make it any less amazing. It's still pretty amazing, and it is unusual that these skeletons seem to go missing. That's a strange aspect of it.
That whole Susquehannock thing, even since they all died out now, and
Right.
the last remnants were in Conestoga at one point, but they all got pushed out or died. But there's a lot there that really needs to be looked into, because it is a fascinating history. They were a warring tribe. They did a lot of weird things. They cremated their dead. Very few indigenous people cremated their dead.
Especially because you would have to get the fire so hot to be able to, correctly cremate a being, so that'd be very hard to do.
But like Tim said, we do know from other tribes and some of the things that they had documented, that these Susquehannock males, for the most part, were big. And actually, one of the symbols they used to use on their shields and their breastplates was something looks very similar to a Bigfoot. So I don't know. I'm not saying that they're connected to Bigfoot anyway, but genetically, there may be something there. As to, if you're talking about giants, there'd be a genetic connection there somehow. If you're talking about Bigfoot, in ancient history or in, paleontology, there was a Gigantopithecus. This was a huge, primate.
It didn't kind of look like an orangutan, but just ginormous.
Yeah, I don't know what the exact sizes, but some of the evidence they have found, dictates this thing was big. Really big. And there are some people in the cryptozoology world who believe that those Bigfoot that went across, or those creatures that went across the land bridge that came into North America, may have been Gigantopithecus, or those that were starting to evolve from Gigantopithecus. I don't know. But as far as actual giants, it's a subject people ask me about all the time, and I really don't know a whole lot about it. I really don't. I've got enough to worry about with all the other stuff that's going on.
Do you guys both specialize like in Bigfoot itself, or are there other cryptids that you've done a lot of research on that you'd like to share?
Well, we both do anything that comes across our desk.
Yeah, and we do get anything.
So tell me about maybe the most unusual cryptid that individually that you have come across that has totally redefined or reshaped your worldview on cryptids, or made you question.
Lon talks to a lot more people than I do, so I'm going to go ahead and let him feel this.
Well, I had been really big, and like I said before, into these winged humanoids in Chicago, in the Chicago area. I've always been into the Mothman phenomena and something similar to that. But I had an encounter in 1988 here in Pennsylvania, not too far from where I'm at. I think Tim knows the area, Camp Conewago. You were just up there not long ago, weren't you?
Yeah, we didn't. They wouldn't let us on the camp. We asked them for permission. Yeah.
But this is the place where I had my encounter. I met a friend of mine when I was living down in Baltimore, who was a scoutmaster. He and I had been in scouts together when we lived up here, and we met by chance, got to talk, and he mentioned, he actually, when he was a kid, when we were kids, we used to we used to camp out on Gettysburg Battlefield back then. That's when you could camp out on the battlefield at nighttime. So I'm really dating myself. And we've both seen a lot of strange things out there because of that. But anyway, he knew I was into the paranormal, and he mentioned to me, he said, you know, a friend and I, another scoutmaster, are going over to Camp Conewago next weekend to do some investigating, because a lot of the troops who have been camping out into the wooded area where most of the campsites set up at, have been run out of there because of these really horrific screaming sounds coming from the woods. And he said, you know, would you mind coming up with us? And I said, yeah, you know, that was back in '88. That's, you know, I was young enough that I didn't mind sleeping on the ground back then. I couldn't do it now. So we got there and we hiked into the woods, and we set up 3 tents, got the campfire going, got everything going. And that first night was pretty, you know, nothing was going on. Though when we woke up the next morning, the guy who was with us mentioned that asked if we had heard footsteps in the campsite. And I did. I heard footsteps. I thought one of them was going out to the woods to relieve themselves or something. So, but nothing was disturbed. So we didn't think much of it. So we spent the day, this was a Saturday, we spent much of the day out in the woods, and we were going into all areas. I mean, you were talking about the old game, the state game land that's in around there.
Yeah,
I don't know if that time it was there, but I know that we hit something that was state owned. But we were out for about 6 hours. So we got back about 6 o'clock that evening, started cooking dinner, and we sat around talking football most of the night. And we're thinking, well, this is going to be a quiet weekend. Nothing's going to happen. Well, about 10 o'clock that night, I figure it was about 10, we heard this screaming sound. Now, it was pretty innocuous. It could have been an animal screaming. You know, there's a lot of wildlife around there.
I didn't know animals screamed. I thought they howled, growled, and barked.
They scream.
Oh, yeah.
Rabbits can really scream. They can scream. A deer can scream.
Oh,
Fox.
okay.
Yeah. I don't know if we had coyotes back then here, but they can scream as well. But yeah, we thought, it's just an animal or something. So we didn't pay any attention to it. So about an hour later, then we heard this horrific scream, and it was loud, and it sounded like a child or a woman screaming, and it was like blood curdling scream.
Wow.
And we took notice then, and it sounded like it was coming in and out. So I'm thinking to myself, was this thing flying or dashing around or doing something? So we decided, well, we're going to stay up the rest of the night. So we sat there nervously, I guess, and after a while, I got up, stretched my legs, and walked around a bit. And I walked out to the trail. We had the campsite, and the trail was between the campsite and the creek, Conewago Creek. Mm-hmm. So I was standing there. Something just doesn't feel right. So I went on back to those guys. I said, look, let's grab our flashlights, go out on the trail a bit, walk up and down, see if we can find it. Okay. So we walked back to back on this trail. We weren't very far away. We were like maybe 50 foot from the trail when we saw this thing standing in the creek. Now, this was in the fall. The creek was really low this time of year, and there was enough light from the moon that we could pretty well see through the woods and into the creek. But there was something standing in the middle of the creek with bright red eyes. And it wasn't just like reflection. It was like something projecting red light. And by the time we got the flashlights on this thing, it literally jettisoned into the air with a whooshing sound. And as
like
it took
wings?
off, no,
like
it just shot up into just like a rocket. I mean, no wings, no nothing. No wings were spread out, though it had wings. We later figured it had wings on its back. But it got to its apex and let out a hellish scream, then took off. We're running back to the campsite, and my buddy's not talking. And the other guy, he asked me, he said, did you see something on his back? And I did. I saw the structure on his back. It looked like it might have been folded wings. Mm-hmm. But we never saw any wings open up when this thing took off. So my buddy eventually opened his mouth and said, well, I'm not sleeping down here tonight. I'm going to go up to the administration building. So those two guys went up there and slept. I stayed down there. I wanted to see
by
it.
yourself?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to see this thing, but nothing else happened that night. Now, years later, I got, I had the blog 20 years later. I put it up on my blog exactly 20 years later. A few people had known about it, but I didn't really mention a whole lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I posted on my blog, a guy who lived over in Dick's Dam. I guess that's just upstream from there. He sent me an email and said, I've been hearing this thing screaming for years now, and I never knew what it was. He said, now I think I might know. I said, well, okay. I didn't really think much of it. But a couple of weeks later, I got another email from a scoutmaster who told me that he and his troop had been up there a couple of weeks before that. And it was during the day, and the boys had been up on down the trail, screwing around. And they came running back all excited and freaking out, saying they saw a dragon on the trail. And of course, the scoutmaster thinks he's pulling his leg. And he said, okay, you saw a dragon. But he said they were upset. So they stayed around camp the rest of the weekend. So, they didn't go back over there. But, he said, now maybe that was the same thing that you saw. But since that time, now I posted that in 2008. And since that time, I've had 6 sightings up and down the Conewago. Now, the Conewago, it's a fairly long for a creek because it runs from Camp Conewago, it kind of goes west, then it turns and heads east and empties into the Susquehanna, which is maybe like 15, 18 miles away from there. And because Tim knows, because he got a research area around there. I've had sightings up and along the Conewago Creek from Dover west into Hamden, around that area. So so there have been sightings, and down there where Tim's at, and we've had sightings down there as well.
So what is this, the dog man, or is this?
No, this is. I think the interesting thing about this sighting that we had was it was very similar to what we're seeing in Chicago. It's a wing, like a membrane wing being with bright red eyes for the most part, very thin, emaciated looking, very dark in color.
Sounds like a demon.
Well, we've had people calling it demon.
Right? Your typical demon description, it sounds like a demon. I
guess. I mean, if you want to call it that. I mean, the head is somewhat small, but it's got these huge red eyes on it. And a lot of the sightings, this thing doesn't use its wings. It has some ability to fly without using its wings. Now, some people have seen it flapping its wings, but to this point, just up until the other day, we had our 142nd sighting that we believe is valid. So but like I said, we've had sightings around here in South Central Pennsylvania as well, the same thing. Not just the ones on Conewago. We had one in Littlestown. We had one out there. What was that? What's that area out there? Was that the Cador's Furnace area?
Cador's Furnace, yeah. Which isn't terribly far from the mouth of the Conewago. It's kind of in between the Conewago and the Cador's there. Yeah.
So this is what I'm hearing. Is this the Mothman?
I mean, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I think Lon's careful to refer to it as a winged humanoid, because.
Yeah, I don't like calling it the Mothman. When this stuff started out in Chicago, I was calling it the Chicago Phantom. But the press, of course, the media, they wanted to put Mothman on there. So I went ahead and relented and used it just not to confuse anybody. But that's what they call it now, the Chicago Mothman.
I was just wondering because that sounds like the accounts that I've read and researched. It sounds like the moth, like a Mothman sighting. So what do we think about werewolves? Would these be considered cryptids, or is this just folklore, legend? Like, do we have any validity to this?
Well, we've had a lot of sightings.
Yeah, people are seeing something that answers to that description. I think that people like to use the term dog man because they don't want the idea of werewolf is something that transforms, and I think people are don't want to necessarily give the idea that these things have transformed from humans on full moons or something like that. I go ahead and just use the term werewolf, like I said, because I'm a folklore guy, and I think we had a perfectly good name for these things already. Why confuse the issue? But I mean, Lon's taken a ton of reports of those.
Yeah.
I'll get him occasionally, but he's gotten a lot of reports of those. What he's called the Lichen Loop here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, my former colleague Butch and I used to work on. He just passed away a couple months ago, and we were pretty heavy into these lichens, these Pennsylvania lichens. We called it the Lichen Loop. It was kind of a oval area between the Allegheny Mountains heading into central Pennsylvania, southeast into Lancaster County, actually. So that's where most of the sightings have been occurring. And it's an area with a lot of game lands and a lot of mountains and ridges and such. So, but like Tim, I don't think there's a breeding population with these either. I really don't. We have found no evidence of that. They're very fleeting. They show up and then they go. But most of the sightings that we've been getting are upright beings that are, bipedal. You say lichens, the descriptions people give us are like those of the underworld movies. The lichens, those huge 9-10 foot tall beings, and these are huge. Now, of course, we do get quadrupeds. The quadrupeds we get, for the most part, have like a hyena look to the body structure, but many times they have a wolf-like head. And we get quite a few of those too. But, we get a lot of those throughout the state. So Pennsylvania has had, and historically, we've had these sightings. From south central Pennsylvania down into Maryland, we've had the Dueo sightings for over 100 years. A lot of the people who the Pennsylvania Dutch who moved from the old world and started building farms in south central, then down into Maryland, used to document the Dueo sightings of these werewolf-like creatures. So, we have quite a rich history of cryptids in this part of the country.
What do you think of, I know this is probably a hard question to answer, but out of all the research you've done, all the thousands of reports that you've taken, or hundreds, as it were, and all the many, many decades that you both have between you researching, is there any one cryptid that stands out to you that is more believable or more provable in your research?
Well, like I said, we have very good footprints when it comes to Bigfoot. What that means is something else, because along with these very wonderful 5-toed footprints with dermal ridges and all these wonderful stuff, we also have these really weird 3-toed footprints that are just really odd, that where people had seen a big hairy upright thing, and then the footprints it leaves behind are these like giant bird feet or something, these weird 3-toed footprints. So along with the very convincing and very seemingly almost zoological quality evidence on one hand, you get this weird evidence on the other. But there's a lot of good evidence. The problem with, and we could probably do a whole podcast on disappearing evidence in the paranormal. A lot of this evidence goes missing, especially if it's like primary evidence. So when I talk in terms of footprints, that is if we use the relic terminology from the Catholic Church in terms of saints. You have a first-class relic is like a part of a saint, the saint's bones or their fingernails or something like that. Second-class relic would be something that belonged to the saint, something that the saint touched. So the best we have are these second-class relics, essentially. So these footprints that we've made casts of. We don't have their feet. We have the prints from their feet. Any kind of first-class relic. People collect hair. People collect blood. It tends to go missing in an incredible rate. Way higher than it should. They'll disappear in the mail. They'll be sent to labs and stuff, and the labs will lose them somehow. This primary evidence goes missing. It tends to go missing, which is a very strange thing. The bodies, the number of people have claimed to have killed Bigfoot, shot him dead. Probably, I don't know, 8 cases I listed in my book, something like that, 100% of the time, not 99% of the time, not 98% of the time, 100% of the time, those bodies are missing. We do not have them. We cannot put our hands on them. One way or another, they disappear. Often they say, oh, the creatures came and took them, or a black van from the government came and spirited away, or whatever. It doesn't matter. My point is, we don't have access to them. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter by which, how they were taken away. We don't have access to them. So there's a big problem with missing evidence when it comes to Bigfoot. That said, I guess, Bigfoot would have better evidence than any other cryptids, I would think. And that might just be because it's more popular and people put more focus on that.
And
I agree with that.
And I think that people who would doubt this, I'm just looked at an article. So the Smithsonian admits to destruction of thousands of giant human skeletons in the early 1900s. This is an article published in 2014, where the Supreme Court ordered the Smithsonian Institution to disclose that it destroyed several giant skeletons in the early 1900s. So this is not out of the realm of possibilities, right? Where these things just magically go missing, So but
the end result is they're still gone. We can't, observe them. We can't experiment on them. We can't. We don't have them. So, however they go missing, it's kind of beyond the. It doesn't matter. They're still gone.
And if people want evidence of this, they should read about Brian Forrester and the Paracas skulls. He had spent years trying to get these tested to see what DNA lie in the Paracas skulls, and literally every institution, would not do the DNA test, and they ended up doing it, and it had fascinating results. We're not going to go there, but what I'm saying is that this is not abnormal for governments around the world or whatever is behind this to, magically make these cases disappear, or people like you both and me who believe in these things, make us look like we're crazy, right? So,
well, the U.S. Smithsonian, even the Soviets had a bad habit of losing Bigfoot and other cryptid evidence for years. There has been some very good anecdotal evidence, testimony of these things. Actually, this evidence, even bodies showing up in these storehouses, and then they're just not there anymore. And the whole Bigfoot DNA debacle is, this has really been going hot and heavy for over a decade now. I've known several people who submitted samples and blood and tissue, and the results that come back are always there is some type of connection with humans, but that's about as far as it goes. Now, why it doesn't go any further than that, I don't know. So, is there something being withheld? Probably. I don't know why the government, even if it is the government, if the government or any other entity is trying to suppress this, maybe there's something that we don't know, but.
Well, you have to look at, just look to the Vatican vault, there's a lot of information in the Vatican vaults, that has been confiscated through millennia that they don't want us to know about. And I think, I really think that, in my personal opinion, religion has been weaponized, right? So this is a control construct. So the existence and the acknowledgement of cryptids, right, would go against a lot of the belief systems for the major religion, Abrahamic religion. So perhaps that power structure still in place behind the scenes, and they don't want this information disclosed. I don't know.
It's hard to tell. I mean, it does seem when you're talking about anything to do with paranormal or UFOs, cryptids, anything, it just seems that any official disclosure is going to be few and far between, if any. And I think they like it like that, and they're just not going to go beyond that.
So any closing, go ahead, Timothy, you were going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just going to give an example just as regards to, UFOs. I think a lot of people are waiting for the government to give them an answer one way or another on UFOs. And I don't think it's going to happen. They can't repair bridges and fill potholes. I don't think they're going to solve that mystery. I don't think they know, but I think they're very happy letting us think that they know.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. Yeah, we think they know more than they actually do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a lot of, every once in a while, you'll have a congressman or a senator jump up and start raising the stink and want some disclosure, but they'll throw out an old unclassified case, and like the Tic Tac
Yeah.
craft. I mean, that dude was just unclassified a dozen years ago. So, yeah, most people who were involved with the community knew about that case anyway. So, yeah, they're going to spoon feed us as long as they can.
So, if either one of you would like to be contacted, or if people have questions or accounts and they would like to contact you, is there an email, Facebook, Messenger, some kind of communication where they can email you or contact you to let them, to tell their story to you? Or
Easiest place to get me is strangefamiliars.com. That's the home for my podcast. And we have stories every week, sometimes cryptid stuff, sometimes ghosts, sometimes UFOs, sometimes history. So we do a whole bunch of different things there, but you can listen to the podcast there. You can find links to my books. You can find links to me. All the contact information at strangefamiliars.com goes right to me.
And my blog is phantomsandmonsters.com. It's a daily blog. We get stuff we put up there from, anybody has any information they want to send me, they can send it to my email, Lon Strickler, phantomsandmonsters.com. The Phantoms and Monsters 4D research team, which Tim is a member of, our website is cryptidhunters.org. And I do a YouTube live show every Friday night at 9:00 at Phantoms and Monsters Radio. And occasionally we do a Wednesday show where we read live narrated cases that come our way.
is that 9:00 Eastern time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just make sure people know.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks you guys so much for your wealth of information, knowledge, and experience. I really appreciate you joining me. And until next time, everybody, this is The Ancient Gift. I'm October Hallam, and we'll be seeing you soon.